Hello, this is a symposium from Tel Aviv University, Network Structure in Semitic Morphology and New Methodology. And my talk is going to introduce Semitic verb morphology in developmental perspective. Semitic morphology is rich in three senses. Many semantic notions are encoded within the word, and this includes valency, lexical aspect, temporality in verbs, ontological classes in nouns and adjectives, and then number, gender, and person agreement. The second sense in which Hebrew morphology is rich is that it organizes the lexicon in large structural systems, which are nonlinear affixation of root and pattern, linear suffixation of stem and suffix, and other systems which are not of interest now. And the third point is that Semitic morphology is characterized by many systematic and semi-consistent morphophonological changes. All of these are relevant to the current talk. We're going to focus on verbs which are critical in early acquisition because they encode events and situations, and therefore they lead to conceptual and lexical expression of very basic notions. Also, verbs anchor verb argument structure, and this, from this point of view, they are critical in the emergence and consolidation of syntax. Hebrew verbs, in addition to everything that has been said before, constitute a small enclosed derivational and inflectional system, which is rich in all morphological senses described above. Verbs are always constructed of morphological components. All verb exemplars that children hear and produce are always inflected. And this is the first morphological arena that Hebrew-speaking children explore and use. Our aims in the current symposium are as follows. First, we aim to model, describe, and explain the rise of morphological complexity in Hebrew verbs in early acquisition. And then we wish to determine the role and interplay of morphological verb components in development. We are going to show you how we use a new methodology of network analysis. This is the Dattner talk, which is going to follow mine. And we're going to demonstrate this methodology in the spontaneous productions of two native Hebrew-speaking children aged 8 years to 2 years in natural interaction with the respective parents. This is the Ashkenazi talk. And finally, we're going to demonstrate the same analysis in the spontaneous productions of triads of native Hebrew-speaking children aged 2 to 8 years in natural peer interaction, and this is the Levy talk. We start with an overview of Hebrew verbs. This is a top-down simplified presentation of the Hebrew verb form. It doesn't include all of the morphophonological changes, but I think it's good enough for the current presentation. So this is a verb. It may start with the prefix, which may belong to the binyan or to the agreement component. Then we have the verb, the root, which is signified by the C's. And then we have the binyan. I'm going to talk about binyanim in a few minutes, which is the vowels and also the prefix. And then we have the suffix, which has to do with agreement. So we have the consonantal root, the vocalic binyan temporal pattern, and the agreement suffix, number, gender, person. Now, here is one example. Hitkadamt, you made progress, you singular feminine. So you have the consonantal root signified here, and the past tense itpael pattern. That's the hitkadam thing. And then the agreement, this is a tu, second singular feminine. Another example, we will talk. Debere is the root, ne is in fact the agreement prefix, which signifies the first person plural, and this is the PL future tense pattern. And I think the final example, noflim, are falling or fall. This is a ne per le, and the agreement im is a masculine plural, and this is a present tense kal pattern. So our view of learning verbs is that they are learned as constructions. First of all, of course, verbs are words. They are words of a special kind, but they have to be learned as words. But in addition, there are structures associated with meanings and functions, where root skeletons convey basic lexical semantics, binyan conjugations express transitivity values and other things, binyan temporal patterns convey tense modality shifts, and finally, there are affixes which are temporal specific that mark number and gender and person agreement. We view language development as grounded in human interaction, experience, and language typology, where children start small with the most frequent structures carrying consistent marking and coherent semantics. We're going to show you, in fact, how children start with dichotomy and go on to divergence. So here is a presentation of the morphological constructions which are so important in the Hebrew verb system. Semitic roots. There are consonantal skeletons of verbs that are marked in yellow here, as you can see. So you have root mesere in yimaser, will be delivered, lemede, limda, she taught, kishkashti, I scribbled, sepere, mesaper, tells or telling, and ne te ne, where you see the ne is, the first ne is missing, in ten give. These roots relate verbs structurally and semantically as in unload, be unloaded, dismantle, be dismantled, and collapse, all constructed on top of bereke, various different binyanim, which I'm going to present eventually, and root sekeme, add up, agree, be agreed, sum up, be summed up, and come up to. Now, the literature tells us that Hebrew-speaking children pay attention to these consonantal skeletons, which are shared across words and are able to manipulate them from early on. And with age and schooling, this ability grows into a very strong abstract awareness of roots, as shown in Levy et al. 2020. And despite being a sublexical discontinuous entity, the root has been shown from various perspectives, including the written perspective, to be the most accessible morpheme in Hebrew. Now we come to the binyan system. So the morpheme that complements the discontinuous consonantal root in the verb is the binyan, which literally means building. The binyan pattern is discontinuous, but it is vocalic, often prefixed. And this is a template into which root radicals are inserted. For example, you can see how root mesere, deliver, is inserted into kal, nif'al, and itpa'el. Now, the binyan means two different things, in fact. From the point of view of derivation and syntax, there are 7 well-known binyan conjugations whose names are presented here. And you can see an example of 5 of them in shut, shut down, turn in, be turned in, and shut oneself. Now, binyan conjugations are morphological entities that organize the verb lexicon in semi-productive derivational families that share a root. Now, these binyan conjugations are associated with transitivity values and other semantic pragmatic notions. And we know that in early childhood, kal verbs constitute almost everything verbal, heard or produced by toddlers and young children. The hif'il and pi'el conjugations, which express high transitivity and causativity, increase with age, and nif'al and itpa'el with low agentivity, express a middle voice, have lower frequency in early childhood and, in fact, all the time. Passive voice is not relevant here because it is a very late acquisition. Now, from this point of view, in fact, the binyan system is, in fact, split into 2 subsystems. One, which we call the older, the historical, the classical subsystem. Hebrew has got about 3,000 years of history. It has high token frequency, high type frequency in early childhood, and most early derivational families come from this subsystem and are confined to it. This is, in fact, the platform to learning the basic transitivity notions in Hebrew. The second subsystem, the newer one, which is associated with the revival of Hebrew about 100 years ago, is very productive, has high type and token frequency in older children and adults. The derivational families that constitute or participate in this subsystem increase with age and schooling and indicate a richer lexicon. Now, from a second point of view, the notion of binyan indicates morphophonology and temporal inflection. In fact, there are 31 binyan-specific temporal patterns because each of the 7 conjugations consists of 5 temporal patterns. For example, this is the temporal pattern of PL, indicated by diber, medaber, etc., talked, talking, will talk, talk, and to talk, past, present, future, imperative, and infinitive. These are, in fact, the actual vocalic patterns that determine the shape of the basic verb stem, and the set of binyan-specific temporal patterns constitutes the paradigm of the binyan conjugation, and it mainly expresses tense and mood. Now, how do these roots and patterns work together? They relate verbs together, so they work across verb stems that make up the temporal binyan paradigm. For example, the temporal paradigm of kal, limsor, mesor, imsor, moser, and masar, and derivationally creating the derivational family across the different binyan conjugations. As you can see here, kal, mifal, and itpael. And here is a second example based on root lemede, again, a temporal paradigm, this time of PL, and the derivational family of lemede, which is learn, be learned, teach, and to act as apprentice. So learning about Semitic roots, roots are the core morphemes of verbs. Their distributions are highly relevant to morpholexical development. And in fact, they they construe verb inflectional paradigms and derivational families. Binyan patterns as derivational entities are critical for learning how the verb lexicon is organized and for syntactic learning. And as temporal entities within each binyan, they are critical for learning the systematics of verb morphophonology and for the expression of tense and mood categories. Now, we haven't forgotten agreement marking, which is added on top of the verb stem that is created by the nonlinear fixation of root and binyan temporal pattern. This is inflection for number, person, and gender in agreement with the grammatical subject. This is linear, that is, it is a suffix or sometimes a prefix, depending on the temporality. And for example, in imso, ne indicates the first plural, and in mesro, u indicates the third plural, past tense. Here you can see that agreement doesn't work uniformly, so infinitive is not inflected for any of these, and in present tense, there is no person marking. So together with temporal patterns, agreement marking on verbs creates 28 possible different inflectional categories. We don't see all of them. We see 25 of them in the corpora that we're going to talk about. So in conclusion, the 3 morphological components of the Hebrew verb are root, binyan, temporal pattern, and agreement inflection, and they interact in acquisition and to contribute to the growth of the morphological complexity. Thank you very much.